And welcoming Dr. Lisa Barnett from Phillips Theological Seminary. Lisa has been with us before, and we're very pleased to have her, and I think you'll enjoy what she has to share with you this morning. So, welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. This may or may not work now. I don't. Of course, I think I hit the wrong share.
I think you're sharing.
Yeah, but it's. I'm not seeing my slide to come. It's messed that up. So let me stop share.
Has no one signed in on Zoom?
Is anyone on Zoom?
Yeah, there's a phone on Zoom.
Okay, that's the phone that's.
Oh, okay. Then no one.
No one. Okay.
No one.
Surprising. We normally have a couple.
Hang on.
For those of you that attended Vacation Church School this week, we had Lisa Kelly from the ARC of Oklahoma speak to us, and I just noticed that the Department of Justice has now sent out a memo saying that they don't think states should have to support people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in their communities. So it's signaling a sign that they're trying to push people back into institutions. So I'm sure there's going to be some uproar about. I hope that
Yeah,
sure
there
our
should
people
be.
who are advocates will.
They're gonna
so-
hear about that from me.
Yeah, from lots of people.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not right.
How is this
so.
happening?
Thank you
I'm
for
not
sharing.
sure which. This is why I wanted to do the share early
Ah.
because.
Yeah.
Now I have no idea. Okay, let me
I
stop.
love Lisa Kelly.
Share.
She's
I'm
wonderful.
part of the
Yeah.
art. Normally, at least.
Where's?
Okay, good.
Hang on. I've got to get out of here and start over.
Sure. Take your time. We're good.
Good for the next hour and 10 minutes.
That's right.
9 minutes. You talk to Todd any?
Other churches, I do AV, I would be helping with
I'm gonna have
this.
coffee with them again.
I need to do something with him.
Thank you.
I'm not a father.
I'm gonna treat myself to lunch.
There.
Treat yourself to lunch. Away from home.
This is
anyway.
really a good turnout for summertime.
It's
There.
great.
Now I'm,
I'm
now I'm
impressed.
back to my screen. All right.
All
All right. Well, it's been a while since I've been here.
It has.
Since last I was here talking about peyote, my book finally came out with the University of Oklahoma Press last May 2025, so it's been out a year now. Wonderful cover, a Woody Crumbo painting that hangs out at the Gilcrease. When it opens again, you can go out and see that. It's been getting great reviews. I've done a lot of book talks, and so really proud of that work. But I moved on for another edited collection that is coming to specifically focus on one little aspect of the book that I talk about, because the Native American church is incorporated in Oklahoma in 1918. But there was one other peyote church incorporated before that in 1914, just for the Otoe-Missouria people, and that is what I kind of want to delve into a little bit. This work is a part of a chapter in an edited collection that's coming in January from the University of Nebraska Press on religion in the North American West. We got a chance to go out to BYU, to the Charles Redd Center for History Research, and workshop it with all the different authors that were selected to be part of it. And so I get chapter 1 with the Otoe Church. Where are the Otoe? The Otoe Reservation, Otoe-Missouria, if you drive up 177 off of the Cimarron Turnpike headed towards Ponca City, right by Round Rock, Oklahoma. It's not in Round Rock, but it's right off 177 there. Little convenience store. Tribal police, slow down, don't speed. Never had that, but warnings, and lots of buildings. And then if you keep driving right before you get to their casino, there's a campground off there. I don't know, I can't believe they do this, but every third week of July, they have a gathering camping out where relatives from Nebraska and scattered across the U.S. come, and that's where they do some of their ceremonies.
Wow.
I know. Tough. I could not do camping third week of July.
I've lived in Oklahoma all my life. I've been to Ponca.
Uh-huh.
I've never heard of this tribe.
Oh, wow.
You
Yeah.
didn't notice there's a sign there.
No, I
Yeah,
didn't.
okay. Just haven't
Big sign.
noticed.
And
I
I have,
must have blinked.
and I have family that were part of them.
Oh, okay, yeah. So let me just kind of background a little bit. Under pressure from the federal government to sell their land in Nebraska in order to purchase land in Oklahoma that they really didn't want, the Otoe-Missouria arrived on their new reservation in the Cherokee outlet of what was then Indian Territory, and they arrived in October of 1881. Let me just kind of put that up. And as the Otoe-Missouria people settled into their new location west of the Arkansas River between the Ponca and the Pawnee reservations, the various Otoe tribal clans began to function again from their removal from Nebraska. And the people held ceremonial war dances, and they formed an organization called the 12 Disciples. I haven't been able to find a whole lot about that, but that one sounds interesting. Later, the influence of the ghost dance was strong among the Otoes and the Missouria, as well as their neighbors, the Pawnees. We think that the ghost dance went away after the Wounded Knee Massacre. It did not. It worked its way down into the southern plains. Justin Gage has a great book on the ghost dance in Oklahoma, and its spread that's also out of OU Press. And then a little later, besides the ghost dance, the Peyote religion came to the Otoe and the Missouria people. But not only that, their exposure to Christianity from different missionaries brought some very diverse theological views and expressions of Christianity to these people, including from their time in Nebraska, the Society of Friends, or the Quakers. There's also a connection to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, as well as the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, now known as Community of Christ. So these varied religious influences contribute to a unique cultural permutation of indigeneity and Christianity around the Peyote religion that became known as, this is the very first Peyote church organized, the Otoe Firstborn Church of Christ. I'll explain more about that later too. So Peyoteism, when the sacred medicine known as peyote comes across the border from Mexico into the United States, it undergoes a lot of ceremonial kind of changes and manifestations, and that Otoe Firstborn Church, as it's now called, that identity is really kind of separate from the identity that formed the Native American church, although the Otoes are members of both churches, or they can be members of the Firstborn Church, their Peyote church, as well as a chapter of the Native American church. And so they are reconstructing some of this landscape. So in talking about the Otoe people, the ancestors of the Otoe, along with the Missouria people and the Iowa and the Ho-Chunk, originally lived as a single tribe in the Great Lakes region near present-day Wisconsin. And then they're migrating to the plains around the 16th century, and the successive groups start to split off and migrate west and southwest and form separate tribes known as the Otoe, the Missouria, and the Iowa, or Iowa. And the Otoes and Missourias once owned land in both Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska. This displacement, though, after they separate and migrate in the 16th century, they're settling in the lower Missouri River Valley, and they continue their expansion westward of the Sioux in the 17th century. And that's where you can kind of see where they're starting to settle along that Nebraska-Kansas line right next to what is now Lincoln, right? And so they're dwelling at that confluence of the Missouri and the Grand Rivers there in Missouri, and settling in Nebraska later on. And in fact, the state of Nebraska gets its name from the Otoe-Missouria words, Nai Braj, meaning water flat, to the Platte River. So it's taking some of the Otoe language there. By the 18th century, like a lot of tribes, the Otoe-Missouria tribe, or the Missouria tribe, is decimated by smallpox and warfare. The remaining members of the Missouria tribe then sort of rejoin the Otoe tribe, forming that Otoe-Missouria Confederation. So they're living there in Nebraska between the great Nemaha River and the Platte River. And the Otoes, and you see the spelling is a little different, there's an E there now, but you see where around who they're living with there. They were the first tribe ever to hold council with Lewis and Clark in their official role as representatives of President Jefferson. The captains presented to the chiefs of the Otoes a document that offered peace while at the same time establishing the sovereignty of the U.S. over the tribe. And of course, increased fur trading in the region brought an increase in diseases and sadly alcohol that became disruptive forces in their lives. Poverty-stricken and often starving, the Otoe-Missouria resorted to the sale of their only resource that they had, and that was their land, in order to survive. So historically, the first sale came in 1830. At the Treaty of Prairie du Chien, the Otoe-Missouria surrendered their claims to any lands east of the Missouri and sold a sliver of their land in southeastern Nebraska along just a little bit of that land. Another cession of about 1 million acres in southeastern Nebraska came in 1833, and then further land cessions came after the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, where the Otoe-Missourians had retained about 162 acres for a reservation along the Big Blue River where they had lived. Before 1854, they held their lands by title, but because of pressure, they're forced to give up more and more, and the reservation starts to shrink. But it's during this time, too, where these decisions to sell land create some factionalism among the Otoe tribe. You have Indian agents who are coming onto the reservation up in Nebraska and taking over about 1869. And in Nebraska, you have the Hicksite Quakers, which is the liberal branch of the Society of Friends, that assume charge of 6 of the reservations, including the Otoe-Missouria reservation, to, quote, civilize and Christianize those people. And they establish a boarding school on the Big Blue Reservation there in Nebraska. And those who accepted this influence became known as the Quaker Band of the Otoe. And these progressive members of the tribe favored assimilation. I know that's weird thinking to think progressive favoring assimilation. The other band that opposed this assimilation and the selling of the land was the Coyote Band. So you have 2 factions there that are split. 1876, Congress approves the sale of 120,000 acres of that Big Blue Reservation, with the remaining reservation land sold in 1881. And here is that Otoe delegation from 1881 that made that decision to cede the final parts of the reservation to the federal government, to open up for, obviously, white settlement. So the Otoes in 1881 and Missourians in Nebraska and Kansas sold what was left and moved to Indian Territory, the new reservation there on Red Rock Creek in current Noble County. And that had been chosen by a delegation from the tribe and actually purchased with tribal funds. Of all the things, you have to relocate, sell, and use the money that you get from the federal government to purchase land, what was originally part of the Cherokee outlet, right, from the Cherokees. Like the Osage and stuff also had to do.
But who gave them the deed?
The deed to
the new land?
at that point, it would have been negotiated with the federal government and the Cherokee. Well, actually, by that time, no, the federal government owned more of this land because the Osage had already moved over and the Pawnee had already moved over and the Ponca, so they would have negotiated with the federal government. The federal government took over control of that land from the Cherokee.
Wow.
Yeah. So removal began in early 1880 when the Coyote Band actually moved down to Kansas to the Sac and Fox Reservation. They didn't want to come to Indian Territory. So, but in 1881, 234 Quaker Band members of the Otoe-Missouria arrived on their new 129,000-acre reservation. They reestablished their boarding school, and then they also set aside some occupancy for the Associated Indian Friends who sent a missionary. So you have another Quaker missionary coming to Oklahoma on their reservation. And eventually, members of the Coyote Band moved northward to join with that Quaker band near Red Rock. And you have this reunification of the two factions in there. And so here is, Red Rock. That's where everything's located. When you look at it here on that little dot right there, that's their reservation just south of the Ponca, going up and right next to the Pawnee. 1892, the agent reports an outbreak of the Messiah craze, the ghost dance, on the reservations of the Otoe, the Ponca, the Pawnee, as well as the Tonkawa. So the ghost dance is coming, and Indian agents are trying to clamp that down. But you also have a ceremony that's coming around peyotism. We're not really sure how it gets connected, although Quanah Parker presided over a peyote meeting near the Otoe Agency in 1892. So most likely it came from the Comanche and his influence bringing this ceremony to the Otoe. And the Otoe also traced the trade of peyote with the Tonkawa even before Quanah Parker's visit. So we're not really sure when they learned about peyote, but they have a ritual use of it. One of the interesting things, though, is that Otoe peyotism, when you look at their cosmological worldviews, there's a belief of the creator known as Wakanda. But you also have this influence from their Quaker missionary in Nebraska, who actually documented a lot of their cosmological views. He wrote in one of his reports that religion was such a religion as nature and her marvelous manifestations inspires. A belief in Wakanda, the great maker of all things, the convincing evidence of whose existence is to be seen on every hand. A great spirit whose smile is the sunshine and all things beautiful, from whom every blessing comes and to whom all gratitude is due.
Amen.
Yeah. Now, and of course with the Quaker, this idea of silence, contemplative silence, sitting in silence, right, until you hear a word from Creator, that contemplative meditation of waiting on a revelation from God, fits in very nicely with some indigenous cosmological worldviews, and particularly around the peyote ceremony, where you're using peyote as this kind of mild hallucinogenic agent in order to put you in a calm state where you can hear a word from Creator and get a revelation. So it kind of fits all together. But also in that part of Ponca, Tonkawa, Ka, you have a lot of Christian influence coming in. Baptist, Methodist, Catholic mission work is done in order to Christianize in all of those areas. So one of the elements of the peyote ceremony that comes to the Otoe people, one of the more prominent leaders early on is a man named Charlie Whitehorn, who had the first distinctive Otoe fireplace, and fireplace is what they call their ritual. It also designates a right to conduct the ceremony. When you have the mantle of the fireplace, you then have the permission to conduct the ceremony. Whitehorn secures his fireplace, the ritual, via a personal vision rather than purchasing it from another Southern Plains tribe. And the documentation is, anecdotally, that Whitehorn heard a voice speaking to him, told him that if his people ever wanted to talk with God, they had the privilege to do so, and God would listen to whatever they had to say if they talked to God at the sacred peyote altar. And Otoe today still believe that Whitehorn's vision granted him the fireplace to conduct peyote ceremonies to help their people get back to some of their culture, ways that they had lost in that diaspora coming down to Oklahoma. In fact, the Otoe still say today, on the cultural ways that remain within the tribe, if you've got no ceremonies, you will be lost. So the worship there. Now, here's what's different about Charlie Whitehorn's ceremony that differs from a lot of the other Native American peyote ceremonies. It is very similar to Quanah Parker's Half Moon ceremony with the altar, dirt mound altar, and the peyote cactus put up on the altar. But Whitehorn arranges for the earth altar where the cactus sits at intersecting lines with the place of individuals to resemble a cross coming through the peyote altar. So it's much more kind of a Christian influence there. But that gets expanded as well to the structure, the teepee. Whitehorn's ceremonial teepee reflected explicitly Christian symbolism. So the practice of painting on a ceremonial teepee was not original to Whitehorn, as peyotists were said to do that, for ghost dance and other peyote meetings. But for Whitehorn, he put a green band around the bottom of this conical structure in such a way that a slight hill was depicted at the back of the structure here. So it's a green band like of land, but a little bit of a hill, and painted on the hill was a white cross to represent Calvary and the cross upon which Christ was crucified. Very Christian elements coming into Whitehorn's ceremony. And another deviation out of the ceremony in terms of the 4 regular officers, the road chief, the drum chief, the fire chief, and the cedar chief, Whitehorn added a north road chief and a south road chief. I think you can sort of see them, H and I. The north road chief, there we go, with east-west. And the south road chief, who sit on that part of the altar, and a doorman who sits on the south side, to make a total of 7 peyotists who participate in the ceremony. So not just 4, but he increases the number to 7. And like other peyote ceremonies, special prayers are offered with long prayer cigarettes rolled in the corn husk, and the prescribed number of prayer cigarettes that's smoked is 4, but Whitehorn departs from that and goes to 7. 7 is an important number for him. But that's probably because 7 is significant for the Otoe-Missouria. There are 7 clans of the tribe.
Oh.
And 7 feathers represent the 7 days of creation, right? The fan changes also later with Whitehorn to 12 feathers, symbolizing 12 designated disciples. So you've got this kind of cultural element as well as some biblical numbers kind of coming into his ceremony. Now, the basic tenets of the Otoe peyote ceremony, led by Charles Whitehorn, start to develop in the early 20th century. But then another gentleman comes to Red Rock, to the reservation, a Sac and Fox, who marries an Otoe woman, and his name is Jonathan Jack Koshaway. He's born in Kansas in 1886 to a Sac and Fox mother and an Otoe mother, lived for a long time with his father's people, but by 1907, he's down in Oklahoma on the Otoe-Missouria reservation to live among his mother's people, and he marries an Otoe woman. He's influenced by Whitehorn as a peyotist, and he also becomes a peyotist by around 1903. But he starts to work with Whitehorn in doing their own sort of peyote ceremony, and he starts to bring some other elements into the ceremony based upon his involvement with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and, of all things, part of the Russellites, who were the followers of Charles Taze Russell, the founder of Zion's Watchtower Tract Society that later becomes Jehovah's Witnesses. So you've got some interesting religious convergence in Jonathan Jack Koshaway here. He was a Bible student in Kansas, studying with some of the Russellites. And later on, and so a lot of in his promotion of the Peyote religion, he's incorporating a lot of millennial sort of views of some of those sects. He frequently spoke about the coming day of judgment, the rebirth of lost ancestors, and the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. He called upon worshipers to publicly confess their sins, repent, and accept salvation of Jesus Christ. He also made some significant changes to Whitehorn's peyote ritual with a prohibition on smoking. Not surprising, coming out of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, right? And the addition of the Bible and scripture reading as a conspicuous part of the peyote ceremony reading. And again, like Joshua Smith's 1833 Words of Wisdom, a revelation from God that prohibited the use of alcohol, tobacco, tea, and coffee, Koshaway prohibits smoking of those corn husk cigarettes. And then later on, Koshaway attempted to reintroduce the smoking, and encountered resistance from members of the Otoe Church, right? So it takes a while to do that. But Koshaway is an interesting figure. So Koshaway teams up with Whitehorn, and they decide, with all of this, hoopla around peyote, that they need to probably incorporate as their own church. And they get a lawyer out of Perry, Oklahoma, Henry Simpson Johnston, who becomes the 7th governor of Oklahoma and the 2nd governor in Oklahoma to be impeached. He's the one that employed his personal administrative secretary was Mamie Hammonds, who was one of the Oklahoma heads of the women KKK.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah. Now, I've actually spent all last week at OSU researching in the Johnston papers. Whether Johnston may have been a Klan member just for political reasons, I don't know. I don't know that he was actually a member of First Christian Church, Disciples of Christ in Perry. He was an elder and treasurer at what is First Christian Church in Perry, Oklahoma. In fact, the current church where they sit was part of his house that he eventually sold them for $1 so that they could build their new property in Perry. After he's impeached, he goes back to Perry. But prior to that, there was a Klan within the state legislature group, and those were the members who were really pushing for Johnston's impeachment. They were the same group that pushed for Jack Walton's impeachment when Jack Walton clamped down on Klan activities in Oklahoma. So, you can make with it what you want. But it's interesting because with Johnston serving as the lawyer for the Otoe, he works with them for a lot of land claim cases as well, but he also helps them incorporate as a church. And this background coming from the Christian Church Disciples of Christ is what's interesting. Because on November 20th, 1914, Koshaway, Charles Whitehorn, and 9 other Peyotists sign formal articles of incorporation that Johnson prepared. Their articles of incorporation do not mention peyote, unlike the Native American Church 4 years later. But all of the signers are Peyotists, and the articles acknowledge the use of peyote through this veiled reference that called for the church to practice ceremonies, rites, customs, uses, and proceedings agreeable to our present ritual and book of faith.
So, excuse me, what's being incorporated?
The Firstborn Church of Christ, which is the Otoe-Peyote Church.
Firstborn, I see.
Yeah, the firstborn. This corporation shall be the Firstborn Church of Christ. And it's really interesting, it's hard to see. They're going to organize, as from the King James Bible in Ephesians 4th chapter, verses 5 and 6, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, as well as Hebrews 12:23, one church of the firstborn. And so they're going through all of this, but what's really interesting is some of the language that gets added into, to promote the kingdom of peace, which is the kingdom of Christ. To this end, the creeds of the dark ages, the superstition and practices of such creeds, which misrepresent the divine character and plan. Folks, that's disciples' language of a non-creedal people. That's not necessarily Otoe, but that is certainly Henry Johnston's religious heritage that gets incorporated into this firstborn Church of Christ.
Could the signers read?
Some could, most of them, and I don't have it. Oh, yeah, I do have it here. Yes. Most of them do sign, except for Charlie Whitehorn, who puts his thumbprint there. So they could read, and I guess they agreed to some extent with what Johnson was looking at there. But it's really interesting. You've got this mix of kind of theological liberalism, modernism, evangelicalism, fundamentalism, all of this kind of coming into this. As well as some of Johnston's own influence. I mean, Johnston's really into some of these metaphysical sects, Rosicrucians, spiritualism, Christian Science. He's respectful of all of those. So it's just really kind of weird. But this language of firstborn Church of Christ is also interesting because that then comes up with other names later on. There are lots of firstborn churches right now, some that are really out there. But what is also interesting that this legal document, Charlie Whitehorn, when it's incorporated in 1914, is listed as one of the 11 named directors or trustees with his mark there. And Whitehorn's prominence lists him as a deacon, as a director, and named him official pastor for the organization. That's Whitehorn. Later, though, a 1916 report shows that 91 of the 226 adult members of the tribe participate in Peyotism, while only 51 belong to the Baptist congregation, 69 to the Quakers, and 24 to the Mormon Church. So out of 226, the majority are peyote practitioners. Now, in 1914, there's a feud between Whitehorn and Koshaway. Oh, there we go. And we get a reorganization after 1914 with that. And that reorganization happens in 1920 when 9 Otoe-Peyotists, led by Whitehorn, file articles of incorporation to establish not the Otoe Firstborn Church of Christ, but the Church of the Firstborn. And again, we believe that earthly sects are all human organizations. We abominate creeds. It's a little harsher language. Johnston's helping them. But really, it's just a name change. And some of the people who signed this particular document, because absent is Koshaway. And that indicates that something happened between Whitehorn and Koshaway. Rumor among some of the Otoe might be some indiscretions with somebody's wife or daughter or something like that, but who knows? I don't know the story. But Koshaway doesn't go away. Koshaway has this peyote ceremony, and the interesting thing about Koshaway is he takes it out west. The Navajo people, the Ute people, would not really know the peyote ceremony were it not for Jonathan Jack Koshaway. Because after he leaves the Red Rock area, he becomes a part of the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and was called by prophecy through Gomer Griffiths to preach the gospel to his own people and to white people. And so there's a mission of the RLDS, started on the Otoe Agency in 1910, that influences and gets Koshaway involved. That Koshaway is ordained into the Aaronic priesthood, and he became a missionary elder where he served in Native American ministries with the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, but also remaining committed to the peyote practice. And so he spreads the gospel of peyote in Oklahoma, in Kansas, Wisconsin, Nebraska, and Utah. And after 1949, Koshaway and his son George stayed with different Navajo for extended periods, preaching only God, peyote, and Jesus Christ. And so I found where he's speaking, right? Reorganized church, and there's Jonathan Koshaway from Red Rock, Oklahoma, preaching. And even when you go on to some of the Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there is the Otoe Church of the Firstborn and Jonathan Koshaway, who's listed in some of the Mormon records. And there's his tombstone buried up there at Red Rock. So yeah, Koshaway is just kind of an interesting figure. But what's interesting in what happens in the story of the Peyote Church and the Firstborn Church of Christ, or how the second incorporation of it as the Church of the Firstborn, a lot of anthropologists who study peyote say, well, that church went away and it got absorbed in 1918 with the Native American Church. And that's where, when I was doing my work on peyote politics, I'm like, no, it didn't. Because when you look at, these are the Otoe women, some of the Peyotists that are coming, but then they didn't, that's 1915, they're still practicing, but even obituaries out of the Ponca City newspaper are listing they're a member of the Pentecostal Church and the Otoe Firstborn Native Church, or this person's a member of the Firstborn Church and the Otoe Native American Church. So it didn't go away. A lot of the historians writing the early history of the Native American Church got it wrong. It continues even to this day. I had an opportunity to go to the Otoe-Missouria reservation and meet, before I did this chapter for this book, I met Elsie Whitehorn, who is the great-great-great-great-granddaughter of Charlie Whitehorn, who founded the church. I met another roadman with the Native American Church who we had a good visit. The mantle of the Firstborn Church is with someone out of the Whitehorn family, and they have not called a ceremony in a long time. And it grieves a lot of the people who are members of the Church of the Firstborn. They want that ceremony. They still have the Native American Church chapter in order to participate in the peyote ceremonies, but it's different because with whatever changes that Firstborn Church ceremony involved, is very meaningful to them. And they're hoping that a ceremony can happen sometime soon. But meanwhile, they have to wait for whoever has the mantle now to call a ceremony, or for that person to pass the mantle on to someone else who will then reinstitute the ceremony. But it's just kind of a fascinating, particularly the Christian symbolism on the teepee and the Christian elements of Scripture that get incorporated into the Articles of Incorporation are really kind of a fascinating permutation of all that kind of, it's a balance of indigenous views of what Christianity means in terms of creator and in terms of cultural with the clans and stuff like that with that number 7. So I'll just
Did you assume that those guys were all high in that picture?
No, it's not a, it's only a, it's only used in ceremony, first of all.
Oh, okay.
And it's only a mild hallucinogenic agent that produces what is today known as synesthesia, which is a condition where you hear colors, you can taste sounds, and it's a mixing of the senses. but it's not addictive at all. Peyote has never been proven to be addictive, and no one has ever died from it. And it is only consumed within the ceremony. Yeah.
But what is it?
It is the button off of a cactus that grows in South Texas and northern Mexico, but because it's now, as of 1970, on the Schedule 1 drug, you can only get it from 4 counties down in South Texas. You can't get it from its natural growth region in northern Mexico. Yeah.
Yeah, I keep hearing the phrase firstborn over and over again. It can't really make much sense of what that's trying to communicate.
It comes out of that Hebrews reference to the firstborn Church of Christ.
There's a Hebrew reference to that?
Yeah, it was back in the Articles of Incorporation. I know those were really hard to see.
Christ was the firstborn from among the dead.
Say again?
Christ
Yeah.
was the firstborn from among the dead.
Yeah.
Christ is the firstborn of what?
He's the first
Among
one
the dead.
to be resurrected.
Yeah. So Hebrews 12:23, one church of the firstborn. And that firstborn resurrection is really strong in Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saint doctrine as well.
What would they do in their ceremonies? What kind of worship ceremonies did they have?
I don't know specifically about the firstborn Church of Christ. I assume it would be very similar with Whitehorn's altar to the half moon ceremony of that came out of the Kiowa Comanche people, where the peyote sits on the altar. It's an all-night ceremony where you're seated on the ground with certain breaks during the night to stand and stretch and get a drink of water. But there's a fire, there's drumming and singing in the language of the people that are gathered. And then there are different times where the dried peyote buttons are passed around and ingested. And it's mainly singing and praying and watching the fire and hoping to hear a word from Creator. For healing whether it's individual or communal healing, that's why the ceremony is called.
Is mantle does that mean authority, or is that
yes,
physical?
Whoever has the mantle, that's the ritual is known as the fireplace. So whoever has the mantle is the one to call the ceremony. That's kind of a Native American vernacular.
You're not talking about a
No.
piece
It's just the authority to call that you oversee the ritual. Yeah.
Does the FBI or the DEA try to break up ceremonies today?
Not as much today as they did. I mean, it's all heavily regulated. You have to have cards to transport peyote from Texas up. You have to have membership cards into the Native American Church, and I'm assuming even into the Firstborn Church, to show that you're a member of the Peyote Church. So it is heavily regulated, and all of that stuff has to be filed with the state of Texas, the state of Oklahoma, or wherever, up Nebraska, and I'm sure the DEA keeps tabs on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there any trace of how the Nebraska tribes got the peyote from Mexico and southern Texas?
Well, my book documents there's a commercial trade that springs up in the late 19th, early 20th century out of Laredo. The little towns that where it's the natural growth region, peyoteros grow it, harvest it, and brought it into Laredo. There were 2 mercantile stores that would trade for goods, and then they would ship it via railroads that came up, from Mexico, even across the border at that time. This peyote trade, and you could just ship it on railroads up, because the railroads ran right next to a lot of the reservations, and so they would stop and they would drop it off at some of the drugstores and stuff, and Native Americans would go, who are participants in the ceremony, would go and purchase it that way.
But back before railroads, when they had it in Nebraska, you don't know how they got it.
Well, the ceremony is only really since 1880s, when they came to Oklahoma, and they're influenced by the Tonkawa, and Quanah Parker comes up for a visit in the 1892 and stuff like that.
Okay.
So eventually it does go up to the plains. The peyote ceremony does to Nebraska, but that's only after it starts in the Kiowa Comanche complex in southwestern Oklahoma and then goes north.
Are men and women both in the tent?
Yeah, I have records, and that was one of the questions. I have records from peyote ceremonies, and I'm assuming it's this way for the Firstborn Church. Early on, some of the Indian agents or the people who weren't peyotists that were tattling on the peyote ceremonies by going to the Indian agents would produce a list of who was at the ceremony. And so there were Mrs. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so, so we assume that women, certainly today, women are involved. In fact, Elsie Whitehorn, she is she's also a roadman, or road person, I guess, with the Native American Church. So the gender constraints are definitely removed today. But I have records of just Mrs. So-and-so, Mrs. So-and-so that was at the ceremony.
You mentioned a dance, ghost dance?
The ghost dance,
yeah,
yes.
I'm interested in what that was and why people tried to suppress it.
The ghost dance came out of from the prophet Wavoka, out of the Peyotists in Utah, and he put together this. It is a dance, but his call with prophecy, like all other Native American prophets before him, stop buying into the white ways and return to your culture, and do this dance and to get back to returning to your culture. And so the dance was really, by the time it also gets up to the northern plains up in Nebraska, it's very much, some of the pictures of that are, it's almost like a Pentecostal experience. You dance to the drum beat so fast, you work yourself up to a frenzy, and then there's like this falling out. You're just kind of laying on the ground, kind of twitching and slaying in the spirit. Exactly. Right. That's what we would equate it to today. By the time it gets up to Nebraska and people are practicing the ghost dance, a lot of Indian agents are fearful, because at that time there are a few little factions that say, well, if we wear special clothing, bullets will not harm us. And white settlers are fearing an uprising of Native peoples. And so that's when it's also related to Custer's defeat. And they get fired on, it's the massacre. But some of the photos, there are actually photos of some of the ghost dance where you see the ceremony and you see them just lying on the ground, that slain in the spirit kind of thing. So, and this too is about the time when out of Topeka, Kansas, Parham and Pentecostalism and the speaking in tongues is also happening. So you also kind of wonder if there's some of that influence, that's kind of starting to spread up to the Nebraska area.
When did you start getting interested in the Indian?
I grew up in Blackwell, surrounded there by all of those little tribes. And so that sort of history has always been with me, but when I was at Bright Divinity School looking for something on the thesis, that's when I came across the Native American Church, and I'm like, I have no idea what this is, and I started that research, and then it became my PhD, and it's just sort of fascinating, this whole different way of being and worship and practicing, and the Christianization that also gets attached to some of that. That's what I'm really interested in, is how much Christian influence with cultural, tribal religious views kind of form that syncretism that produces something that's very meaningful to a particular group of people. Yeah.
Was the altered state of consciousness, albeit mild, that they experienced under the influence of peyote, considered something that would help bring them closer to the Creator, or a consciousness of the Creator?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're specifically sitting all night, staring at the fire, hoping to hear a word of healing. But there's also, peyote was also, it's a sacred medicine, and there are some medicinal healing properties to it that got overlooked in the early 20th century when white missionaries and congressional, Indian agents are trying to ban the ceremony. A lot of the early talk in the 1918 peyote hearings was, whites were claiming, oh, it's an intoxicant like alcohol, and the peyotists are saying, no, as a matter of fact, it cures alcoholism. When folks were coming back from the boarding schools with consumption, tuberculosis, a lot of them would go to a peyote ceremony and suddenly find healing from ingesting the peyote. Even today, there are psychiatrists that are working with the use of peyote for Native Americans in that ceremony and used in ceremony as an ethical way of life, and they are documenting cures for alcoholism and drug addiction.
Wow.
Yeah. At one time early on, Park Davis Pharmaceutical was interested until all of the Christian white missionaries were starting to make the ruckus, and they kind of dropped it as something that might be useful. And that is one of the concerns of Native people today. It's on the Schedule I drug list because it got put in after the hippies started going down in the 1960s to the peyote fields and destroying stuff and trying to get high off of it. They said, no, we'll just ban it entirely. But a lot of Native peoples, they're really divided. Do we want it off the Schedule I, or is being on the Schedule I our protection so that Big Pharma doesn't pick it up and profit from it? So that's a conversation among Native communities.
Yeah. Peyote was a big joke sort of thing when I was in college in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to college in Texas.
I mean,
people would do that.
Well, and that's then what prompts Nixon's war on drug to get it added to the Schedule I drugs to stomp that out.
We considered it a drug.
Do you think it'd ever be a Schedule II or anything like that?
It could be. I mean, given what's been happening with some of the changes around marijuana, there's that possibility. But again, a lot of peyotists today think that because it is a sacred medicine, that keeping it as a Schedule I drug might be the best thing for them, just heavily regulated.
Well, you see the problems that have come with deregulating marijuana.
Yes,
I mean, yes,
and I think that's what...
It has benefits.
And the supply in the natural growth region is also limited. In the 4 counties now, it used to be more counties up along the Rio Grande, but now it's down to 4. And you have agribusiness that has come in and plowed over a lot of the peyote fields, but you also have climate change that has impacted the ability for the cactus to regrow after being harvested. So, supply and demand. Yes, sir.
Totally away from the interest in hallucinogens that my friends have here.
Yeah.
Say the name of the man who reorganized and ended up with the Navajo.
His name is Jonathan Koshaway. Also goes by Jack Koshaway.
Okay. He's the one who married
an Otoe woman. He was Sac and Fox.
Oh, he was okay.
His father was Sac and Fox, and his mother was Otoe. So he was part Otoe, and then he came down to live with his mother's people and married an Otoe woman.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Charlie Whitehorn, the founder of the Firstborn Church, was Otoe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why were you interested in him?
My sweet Linda, who a handful of you knew, her father was reorganized.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I've had a lot of contact with people from that faith. Now I have trouble remembering Community of Christ. And,
right, yeah.
And a lot of her family, Lamoni, is where their university is. Their Brigham Young is in Lamoni, Iowa, which I guess geographically is very close to the regions that we were talking about.
Very much.
So I was just trying. I missed that he was Native American. That's why.
Right. So he had influence with the original Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints there in Kansas, Missouri, and then joins the reorganized, but goes out to Utah. The Community of Christ is still heavily in the Missouri area, and their
Yes.
headquarters are still over in Missouri. Yeah.
Yeah, their Salt Lake City is Independence, Missouri.
Yes. Yes.
Really?
Yeah.
So where are your studies and research taking you now?
Something totally different, because I
Okay.
tend to do American religion in the Gilded Age progressive era. That's where I tend to focus. So I have another chapter in another book coming out in 2027, The American West Between the World Wars, and the title of my chapter is Oklahoma Women Lead the Way into the KKK.
Wow.
Because my research has shown, prior to the 1923 incorporation of the women's KKK as an auxiliary of the men's, there were all these little women's group, the Grand League and some others out of Colorado, out of Texas, the Pacific Northwest, that were these little groups that were claiming they were part of the Klan because their husbands were, but they formed their own little groups. Well, I discover a group incorporated even before those, out of Claremore, Oklahoma, and the men are members of the Klan, but they form this group for their wives, and it's called the WAP Study Club, White American Protestant Study Club. And they align themselves with William Joseph Simmons, who gets the Klan back going again in the 20th century. Meanwhile, he gets in a fight with Hiram Evans, who's a dentist from Dallas, over who's going to control the men's Klan. And the WAP people stick with Simmons. Simmons, in his court battles with Evans, says, well, I'm going to form my separate organization. So he has the men doing an organization. But he says, I'm going to have a women's group, and I'm going to call it the Camellias. And so the WAP Study Club reincorporates, new name change, as the Camellias, and they get new blue uniforms, and their very first parade is in downtown Tulsa, where William Simmons comes to launch this new women's group. And he says, this would have been 22, I think.
Okay.
Maybe 21, 22. I'll have to,
After
yeah, it's
the
been a while.
massacre.
Yeah, it's right after when all this starts happening.
Okay.
And he says, I'm basing it on this WAP Study Club. But then when you look at the Articles of Incorporation from that and the Articles of Incorporation from the WKKK, it's the same rhetoric.
Mm-hmm.
It is the same rhetoric.
The KKK was incorporated?
Yeah. As a fraternal organization, yeah. Legally for tax, yeah.
Wow.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
I thought they were a rogue.
No, in the 20s they incorporate. And then Simmons sells his interest to Evans, and he just totally disappears. And meanwhile, you've got all these Camellia women who are really upset that he sold them out.
Wow.
And so they're deciding whether they want to stick with their own little separate group or whether they want to join the women's KKK that ultimately Evans does establish in 1923. So that's my next direction, building on that chapter.
Wow.
With more of that work. Because there's all sorts of little women's
And
groups.
now for something different.
Yes.
They had a parade in Tulsa?
Yeah, the women did, to launch the new Camellia and their new uniforms.
And it's good that we know that history.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
the Klan was pretty strong in Tulsa.
Oh, they were.
Really?
Oh, yeah, they were.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
don't talk about it
Well,
nowadays, but it was.
Where you been?
I had no idea.
You had no idea.
They don't keep that
Yeah.
in schools.
I thought KKK was in the South.
This is the
No,
South.
no. By the 20th century, Indiana and Texas are the hot spots, but it's out to
Race
Colorado,
massacre.
it's out to the
Indiana.
Pacific Northwest,
Yeah.
Oregon, and
It was huge.
Washington.
I know some people
Huge.
say Oklahoma, Tulsa's the Midwest. It's pretty south.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
I did mine.
Well, Professor Barnett, thank you so
Thank
much.
you all.
This was
Thank
great.
you all. Really interesting. I have no idea when my computer just shut off. I guess I'll have to restart it.
You're gonna get out of the
Well, of
room.
course not.
Oh yeah, there's a lot to be learned.
Oh, I know that.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Photoshop.
Yes, please.
1921.